I started spending nights with my client while my husband was at work, but then I got pregnant and I couldn't believe it when I found out that my husband had installed a hidden recorder in my purse. I had suspected for a while that he was up to something, but I never would have thought he would go to such lengths to invade my privacy, and now I'm in a big mess. My name is Olivia. I'm a 34-year-old fashion consultant. I help my clients in doing their personal clothings and accessories shoppings. Trust me, I get well paid for it. The name of my soon-to-be ex-husband is Landon. He is a 39-year-old surgeon. Based on personal reasons, I won't be giving out the name of the hospital Landon works at so as to not create any more problems for myself and him. I'm already in a big mess and I wouldn't want to complicate things any further. Landon and I started off on a good note, but along the way things began going south. I don't really know what actually happened, but I got bored with our relationship and I tried spicing things up between us, which didn't amount to anything. Yes, I did have a conversation with my husband about it, but he seemed not interested because he couldn't understand where I was coming from. I know a lot of you would think the reason for my infidelity was because my husband was a busy type and he didn't give me the maximum attention I needed, right? Well, no, that's not entirely the case. Landon and I are both busy types and hardly been at home. Most times I'm always on a shopping tour with my clients and my husband is mostly on call rotation. I just needed more from him and he couldn't give me what I wanted. My husband and I met on a dating app 7 years ago. At that time I wanted to settle down and give love a trial again after my past relationships, so a friend of mine recommended the app for me. It was there I got to know Landon. Apparently, the app matched us together. We talked a lot on the phone and chatted for long hours. In less than a month we were already in love with each other and we started dating. It was a long-distance relationship because both of us weren't in the same city. But we later got to meet each other after 3 months. Yes, it took that long because we both were busy. From there I introduced him to my family and relatives. He won the heart of my family because he was a gentle and good-looking man and also knows how to relate well with them. So, we dated for like 2 years before we finally tied the knot together. In those 2 years Landon and I didn't live together. We were in a long-distance relationship and only met on specific occasions like birthdays, holidays, and all of that. Looking back right now, I wish I had known better. We didn't actually live together for more than 48 hours to actually get to know each other really well. My husband and I were eager to get married. We judged our relationship with the frequent phone calls and chats we did. And when we met we were going out and having fun together. But all of that changed. This wasn't the kind of marriage I wanted. It seemed like our jobs were one of the major issues we had because we didn't have time for each other 3 years after we got married. On my own part I tried making out time for us and tried spicing things up. I booked hotels for us to spend time together, made reservations in restaurants for us to try out some intercontinental dishes and all of that. But guess what? My darling husband was never around. Even when he's not on duty he prefers going out with his colleagues than spending time with me. And when I complain he would say it's work-related. Yes, Landon provided everything that would keep me comfortable. Money and food weren't the problem because he provided that for me. The major problem in our marriage was that my husband and I were emotionally disconnected and we lacked communication. Landon and I were couples, but it felt like we were roommates living under one roof instead of partners. We lacked meaningful communication and didn't share thoughts together like we used to, and the feelings we had for each other were dying down every single day. Of course that made me feel so ignored and frustrated. My job is an exciting one because I get to go to new places and even have fun. But I wanted to not only go to these places alone with my clients but also with my husband. The first 2 years of our marriage were lovely. We went on a lot of vacations and spent quality time together. Everything changed on our 3rd year anniversary. I don't know what happened, but we stopped going on vacations together like we used to. It has gotten worse since then. I'm really the type that likes going out with my partner and doing stuff together as a couple. I love to get attention whenever I go out with my partner. Landon, on the other hand, isn't that type. He's a quiet and very reserved person. In fact, most of our friends looked up to us as the ideal couple because we perfectly matched together. But none of them had any idea that I was the one putting in a lot of work in our relationship. I know most of you would ask, why did I go on with the marriage plans if we weren't compatible? I get a lot of these questions ever since some of our friends and relatives learned about the news of my infidelity. The truth is I never saw this coming. Like I earlier mentioned, Landon and I started on a good note. It was all lovely from the beginning, but everything got sour along the way. I didn't know it was going to be like this. Maybe he couldn't keep up with the charade and I might have expected so much from him. Without wasting much of you guys' time and my time also, I would quickly go straight to how I cheated on Landon. Frantically speaking, my infidelity wasn't intentional. Yes, it wasn't. Most of you wouldn't believe it and I'm not mentally ready to explain myself. It just happened and sometimes I regret it. No responsible man deserves to be cheated on, especially not the kind of man I married. It just that the spark of love we started off with died down and I was left with fanning the flames to revive it. Landon didn't bother and he never tried working things out. His lack of emotional intelligence and communication got me fed up. I needed a shoulder to cry on and wanted someone to confide in. I told a few close friends and neither of them understood me. Some of them thought I was just a gold digger. After all, I had everything a woman would pray to have. What more do I want? Like the saying goes, only the wearer knows where the shoe pinches. So, I met my affair partner online. Apparently, he was one of my clients that I do personal shoppings for. His name is Frank. Frank has been my client for more than 2 years now. We had never met prior to us dating. We only communicated online during business transactions. He lived in another city very far from mine. One day Frank planned to come to town and asked if we could meet up. He wanted to get some clothes from a boutique and he needed some help. I was happy that day because I was meeting him for the first time. I didn't know why, but I was so excited then. To be very honest, I admired Frank then, but I strictly made it business between us. I hadn't met him, but it felt like I had known him for years. Our conversation on the phone was so unusual, like the other clients. I got to choose most of his outfits and he would literally send me pictures of him putting them on. He was always asking about how I spent my day and also asked about my business. I was happy that at least someone cared for me. So guys, that day I dropped everything I was doing then and went to meet him at the airport. Frank was new to the town, so I showed him around for a few hours before we went shopping. He loved the city and wanted to spend more days than planned. That time, Frank was to leave immediately, but his flight was cancelled. So, I helped him out in booking a hotel to spend the night. I thought of bringing him to the house, but I couldn't because my husband and I were going through stuff and I didn't want to complicate things further. I didn't want Landon to think that I had brought a man and suspect him to be my affair partner. Frank and I talked through the night and he didn't stop talking about how he had fun that day. Right now I honestly wish I didn't chat with Frank because that was the beginning of my affair with him. From what seemed to be an harmless conversation turned into a full-blown affair. Guys, I didn't know when Frank and I had switched from business chats to flirting. We flirted with each other and talked about inappropriate things. At that moment I shouldn't have given in. It was a temptation that was to be resisted, but then it felt so nice. Maybe that was what I needed so much at that time. The conversation took longer and we both went to bed late than usual. My husband was busy with his laptop that night and didn't even notice what was going on. At every interval I giggled at the messages I was getting on my phone, but my husband was too engrossed with whatever he was doing with his laptop. I didn't care and continued my chat until Frank and I decided to retire to bed that night. The next day was a Saturday morning. My husband was off duty that day and I also was free and had nothing to do. Like every other day, that day was normal like it used to be. Landon and I were just living our day individually. After all, we were living like roommates. There was a lack of intimacy between us. When I try making out with him, he usually gives the excuse that he is tired. That got me so frustrated. There was nothing like physical and emotional closeness between us. I got so used to it that I stopped bothering myself about it. I also stopped trying to spice things up. Instead, I went to seek for emotional connection outside the relationship. That day I was very bored at home. I had nowhere to go or something to do. I called my friends Jenny and Tyler and asked if we could hang out somewhere and relax. They agreed and we went to a beach to have some fun together. Spending time with those two was the best. Jenny and Tyler are fun to be with and can light up one's mood. Spending time with them actually means time for some chit-chats. We got to the beach and relaxed under a nice spot. We chatted about a lot of things and how we have missed one another after a long time. It felt so good spending time with them. It was there I spilled what was going on between Frank and I. You guys needed to see the shock on their faces. It was so funny. They never expected it. Anyways, I did tell them then that it was not too serious like they had imagined. Of course, a genuine friend would tell you it is bad to flirt with a man knowing fully that you are married. They did advise me not to give in to the temptation, but I didn't listen. I was just too focused on making myself happy. I wanted to try it out to see how it was going to be. Jenny and Tyler didn't press further because they saw that my mind was made up and there was nothing they would tell me that was going to change my mind at that moment. I even asked them to change the topic and switch to another exciting one. At that point, Frank's call came in. He wanted us to see. I thought maybe it was time for him to go back to his city and wanted to say goodbye to me, but that wasn't the case. Frank called me to meet him at his hotel. I apologized to the girls for not spending time like expected. Immediately I went to see Frank. I got to Frank's room and I discovered he wasn't ready as expected. He didn't look like someone that was to travel. I asked him why he hadn't dressed up and told me he wouldn't be leaving the city anytime soon because he had some business to do. Apparently, his boss had called him and told him about the recent development. Frank was to stay in town for about 2 months and 2 weeks. That means, he would need an apartment to stay until then, right? Well, yes. So he proposed we look for a good apartment together that day because he couldn't keep up with the hotel bills at that time and also needed some space to fully settle in. Frank and I headed out to search for it. In less than 2-3 hours we were able to find a good apartment for him. Immediately he moved in and I helped him out in settling in also. I spent the rest of the day at Frank's new apartment. We both drank and ate some food. I had a whole lot of fun at his place. When it was time for me to leave, Frank pulled me closer to himself and said he doesn't want me to leave and would like if I could spend the night at his place. I didn't know what to say at that moment. My heart was beating so fast. I wanted to stay up. Just then I remembered my husband and told Frank that my husband would be waiting for me and needed to leave. Frank didn't listen to all that I was saying and he kissed me. Of course I couldn't resist him either because I had wanted it all this while but was too scared to have made the first move. So guys, for the first time in a very long time I felt alive again then. Frank and I made out and he sure gave me what I wanted. It felt so good that ever since that day I kept going back to him. Our love grew stronger that night. I did spend the night at Frank's and left earlier the next day before Frank could wake up. I left a note for him on the table. Of course when I got home my husband asked me a lot of questions but I sorted myself before going home that day. I had told Jenny and Tyler to cover me up in case Landon calls, which they did. Landon wasn't satisfied with what the girls and I told him. He suspected something fishy but I cared less after all. So guys, Frank and I kept on meeting at his place and went to a lot of places where I had loved Landon and I to go together as couples. There were times Frank came over to spend the night at my place. During that period, my husband was mostly on-call rotation and it was just the perfect time for us to spend time together watching movies, playing games, cooking together and most importantly, making out. It was a whole lot of fun and I did enjoy myself. It even got to a point the neighbors started suspecting Frank's frequent visits at our place. They knew that Frank was not just a friend and also noticed he usually comes whenever Landon wasn't around. Most of the neighbors knew Landon and I to be couples because we had lived in the neighborhood for a long time now. Their suspicions made Landon keep asking me questions but I kept outsmarting him. That didn't stop me from bringing Frank to our house. In fact, our affair lasted for about a month and Landon couldn't catch me. But guys, everything changed just one morning. I woke up that day feeling nauseous. I kept visiting the restroom and was throwing up at every interval. I thought maybe I had a fever. I was so tired and restless. Everything I tasted that day was bland and I couldn't eat my favorite meal. It kept on for about a week before I finally decided to go to the hospital and run a test. It was then I got the most shock of my life. The doctor told me I was a few weeks pregnant and even congratulated me. I had mixed feelings about the news. Of course I was happy that I was about to become a mom but wasn't happy that my husband was not the father of my child. I got so scared and ran out of the hospital and went home. I got home and was panting thinking of what would happen if Landon learned about it. Immediately I took my phone and told Frank about the outcome of the test. He was the one that suggested it in the first place. From the sound of Frank's voice, he wasn't too happy with the news. I could tell he wasn't ready to become a dad just yet. I got angry and ended the call. We didn't speak to each other for about 4 days. At that point, Landon knew that something was wrong with me from my behavior, and he knew that I wouldn't open up even if he tried to ask. So he didn't ask but planned out a way to find out by himself. For days I was at home. I didn't go anywhere. Just one morning I called the girls for us to meet up at our usual spot. My husband was at home that day and he was acting funny. I just couldn't understand what he was up to that day. He acted up nice and even gave me a kiss. Something he hadn't done for months. I just followed up with it and headed out quickly so as to not keep Jenny and Tyler waiting. Immediately I got there without wasting much time. I told them I was pregnant. They were so happy. Jenny started dreaming of how she was going to be a godmother, and Tyler also. I was shocked by the way they received the news. At that time I broke the bad news that Landon wasn't the father but Frank, the guy we spoke about the other day. Immediately Jenny and Tyler shouted in disbelief. They were surprised by the news and asked if Landon knew about it, and I said no. They became worried and felt pity for me. We started planning on how I was going to break the news to Landon. I was very scared. The thought of that made me lose my mood. I finished my lunch and said goodbye to my friends. I was completely unaware that every word I had spoken was being recorded. I went about my day as usual, not knowing that my husband was probably listening to the recording over and over again, filled with anger and hurt. Late that night, as we were getting ready to retire to bed, my husband confronted me with the recording. I was shocked and surprised. I felt betrayed by his actions for going that low to record my conversation. He demanded to know the truth and I couldn't deny it any longer. I got so scared and I admitted to my affair and my pregnancy, with tears running down my face. I could see the anger and hurt in his eyes, and that's when the worries began to set in. What would he do now that he had proof of my infidelity? Would he leave me? Would he tell my family and friends? My mind was racing with all sorts of scenarios, and none of them were good. I felt sick to my stomach, regretting ever having the affair. My husband didn't say much after that. He just left the room. I wasn't expecting that reaction from him. I was wondering what he was going to do next. Landon left the house with some clothes and didn't return home for days. I was very worried. I kept calling and texting, but he kept rejecting my calls and didn't respond to any messages. I called Frank and told him about what had happened and came to check on me for a few hours before he left. After some while my husband returned back from wherever he was coming from. I kept apologizing for him to forgive me. Immediately he stretched out a divorce papers and told me it was over. Landon asked me to sign it and leave the house immediately. Guys, I have still not yet signed the divorce papers. I want you guys to advise me on how to go about it. Honestly, I made a very big mistake and I want my husband to forgive me. Update. 2 months later and I am here with an update. I solicited advice and none was able to save my marriage. Honestly speaking, y'all are mean. You guys all only spoke harshly, no one actually tried to help me. Most of y'all were saying nasty things to me and making mockery of me. I needed advice but instead I was made fun of. The last month has been very challenging for me. Being a pregnant woman and going through a divorce had a toll on me. Yes, I didn't sign the divorce papers when my husband handed it to me. I took him to court because he can't just come and serve me divorce papers after leaving the house to wherever he went. I admit that I made a mistake, but at least I deserve to be forgiven. I am a human. Yes, I cheated on my husband. But it's not entirely my fault. Landon has his own portion of blame also. If he had listened to me when I was trying to have conversations with him about how I felt and how our relationship was going sour, maybe things wouldn't have ended the way it did. I was frustrated by that marriage. How can my husband and I be living under one roof as roommates? No physical connection and our intimacy was very poor. I just wanted to see and hear and to beg for everything before I could get it. I know you all would be thinking I'm saying this to justify my infidelity. But that's not it. I made a mistake and I accepted it. When Landon and I were getting married, we made an agreement that divorce is never an option no matter what happens. So what happened now? I reminded him about this statement and looked me in the eye and told me that I should be ashamed of myself by cheating on him and getting pregnant by another man. My husband was filled with hurt and anger. I could feel it from his behavior. I tried everything within my power to change his mind, but he was bent on divorcing me. At that point I knew I couldn't do it alone, so I called Jenny and Tyler to help me talk to him. But he didn't listen. I even went as far as pleading with my parents and seeing if he still had some amount of respect for them and forgiving me, but his mind was made up at that time and nothing was going to change it. Landon even told me to call anybody I can think of, but he won't take me back. It was at that point I knew that nothing I would do would make Landon forgive me. The fact that I was already pregnant made matters worse. That even angered him the most, to the extent he didn't even want to see me. The sight of me irritated him. I took him to court since he was bent on getting a divorce. I wanted to see if I could get something tangible from it. But guys, if I had known, I wouldn't have taken that decision. Taking him to court was a bad idea and a waste of time. Landon had the major share and I was left with nothing to write home about. Before the divorce I was living with Tyler, but I had to move out immediately the divorce was finalized. She was moving out of town and putting her place up for rent. The little penny-eyed can't even afford the rent. Jenny also moved in with her partner. Of course I can't stay with them. After the divorce papers were signed I had nowhere to go and my parents were still angry with me and told me not to return back home except I had made out with my husband. At that point, I didn't know what to do because my husband and I had gone our separate ways already. I had nowhere to go or who to run to for help. I became so restless. It was then I decided to move into Frank's apartment. I thought about it and it wasn't a bad idea. Besides, I was pregnant for him and he should be ready to care for his baby and I. So, I parked all my belongings and headed straight to Frank's apartment. I didn't inform him about my coming so he won't stop me. I got to the place and discovered that Frank wasn't at home. I knew his door password code and went in. I helped myself in settling in. After much work that day I noticed I hadn't eaten anything since that morning and so I went to the kitchen to help myself. It was at that time Frank came in and was shocked to see me inside. Immediately he asked what I was doing and why I didn't inform me about my arrival. I told him that I had come to stay and we should continue from where we stopped. Frank looked at me with utmost disgust and left. He went to take a shower and then retired for the night. He locked the room and made me sleep on the couch. The apartment was just a room. He didn't care whether I was comfortable or not. The first few days were hard. Frank made me regret having an affair with him. Frank even went to the extent of using my card without my consent. He would go have fun with it and come back without any explanation. When I complained, he would emotionally blackmail me. Countless times he had said hurtful things to me. But I kept enduring his nasty behavior because I had nowhere to go or who to run to. He was just my saving grace. Frank kept spending my money anyhow that pleased him. It got to a point where he seized my credit card and didn't allow me to have any access to it. I didn't know what to do. Every day I kept receiving debits of things I didn't purchase. It was so annoying and frustrating. Frank was blowing up my life savings in seconds without feeling any form of remorse or pity for me. Countless times I pleaded with him to at least save some of it for me so I could use it to take care of myself and the baby, but he didn't listen. Instead told me to leave his house if I was capable of taking care of myself and the baby. Update. Hey guys. This is the final update about everything that went down after the divorce scenario. Honestly guys, life after filing for divorce hasn't been easy on me. I'm emotionally and physically drained. Every passing day I keep regretting all that I did. I shouldn't have stood that low in having an affair with my client to the point of getting pregnant for him. Moving in with Frank was a very bad idea. It was nothing but heel and regrets. Right now Frank is not even ready to cater for any child. He has told me that on several occasions and even advised me to get rid of it because he's not even sure if he's the father of the baby. But I am not going to abort this baby because I want to keep it and wouldn't want to take an innocent child's life because of my reckless mistake. I thought living with my baby daddy after the divorce was going to ease things out for me, but it didn't. A few weeks after moving in with Frank was nothing but a whole lot of hell. He treated me like a piece of trash and didn't care that I was carrying his child. Guys, Frank is way worse than my ex-husband, Landon. Sometimes I wondered if maybe all that we shared together meant nothing to him. I felt so used and cheap. I should have known better and handled the issue with my husband and I in another way rather than cheating on him. I cheated on my husband with the wrong person. Every minute with Frank was nothing but fear, regret and shame. Frank would always tell me that he just wanted to have fun with me and nothing was special about me. Just to spite me, Frank brought random girls to the apartment and made me clean up after their mess. In my condition I was turned into a house help. I did the cleaning and washing. I also discovered that Frank was having an affair with one of the ladies he brought home one night. Their late-night chats and calls got frequent and that got me irritated. I summoned courage to confront the lady by paying her a visit at her apartment. It took me a while before I could get hold of Frank's phone. He was overprotective of his phone, most especially his messages. I finally got hold of his phone one night when he was fast asleep in the living room. Getting his phone wasn't an easy one. It took me a few minutes before I could open it. The last time I got hold of Frank's phone was when we were dating. In fact, he used my birthday as the password code. That made me have access to his phone and could read his messages and call logs, but he changed it after my husband and I got divorced. So guys, I tried random codes but it wasn't working. Just then I remembered a code he once told me about and it worked. It was his parents' anniversary. Immediately I went through his chats and got to know who he was constantly chatting with. I wasn't wrong after all, my suspicions were correct. It was indeed one of the random ladies he brought home one night. I typed the number in my phone and read through their chats if I could get any vital information. Luckily I did it, and from there I got to know where the lady lived. The next day I dressed up to pay her a friendly visit. Well, not so friendly though. I got to the address and headed straight to her apartment. I knocked for a few seconds before someone opened the door. It was a lady and I needed no one to tell me it was the lady Frank was cheating on me with. I introduced myself as Frank's fiancé and clearly told her that we were expecting her first child together and warned her to stay away from Frank. Of course she made a mockery of me and laughed and told me that I was delusional to think that Frank was serious about it. I got so mad and I didn't know when I slapped her twice on the face. I even went as far as grabbing her by her hair and told her not to ever speak to me in such a manner ever again. The lady also retaliated by grabbing my hair and told me the only reason she's letting me go was because I was pregnant. If not, she could have done something worse to me. I wasn't moved by what she said and I told her to do her worst. The lady told me to leave her apartment immediately, otherwise she would call the security to throw me out. After a few seconds I let go of her hair and she also let go of mine. Of course I had to leave because I didn't want to be thrown out by security guards. That day I felt so good after putting her in her place. It felt like a huge burden was off my chest. After I left her place I went for a pregnancy check at the hospital. You all wouldn't believe who I ran into. It was my ex-husband, Landon. I ran into him in the lobby. I tried everything I could to talk to him but he snubbed me and did like I never existed. I could see that he had moved on and there was nothing left to talk about. I went to the room where I was to be checked and left immediately I was done and went back home. When I got home I found my things on the front porch. I was surprised and wondered who could have put it there. I tried unlocking the door using the passcode but it didn't work. Immediately I knocked and Frank opened the door. From the look on his face he was so angry and upset and I asked him why my things were outside. Immediately he yelled at me and asked who gave me the audacity to go and confront his girlfriend at her apartment. He demanded an answer but I kept quiet. Frank started saying all sorts of hurtful things to me. I got tired of those words from Frank and gave him a peace of mind. We got into a heated argument and Frank asked me to leave his house. He said I was rude and ungrateful, that he did me a favor in feeding and housing me and that he couldn't do it any longer. He dragged me out from the door, parked my belongings and threw me out in the rain. That day there was a heavy downpour. Frank didn't care and pushed me out that day. I was walking aimlessly on the street all drenched up. I had nowhere to go. I slept in a trashy area. Right now I'm literally back to square one. My business has folded and no client has reached out to me since the last 4 months. All the money has been squandered by Frank. He emotionally manipulated me and spent all my money carrying random girls and blowing it up in the club. I really do not know where to start from right now. My life is a big mess and I'm back to the street.